So what I'd like to share with you are my thoughts on what are the key ingredients for an effective and engaging online course. And most of what I will cover today comes from about 20 years of experience teaching in the online environment in our online MBA program at the Kelley School called Kelley Direct. And also I'm going to share with you some themes which are the result of some focus groups that were done, study that was done involving focus groups with some of our MBA students a few years ago. This helped me tremendously to improve my teaching techniques online. So I want to share those with you. So here is a brief outline of what we will cover today. So I think it's quite a challenge, but also we have some opportunities here in online teaching. I want to learn a little bit about your background and your experience with online teaching. I think we have a few polls that will, the results will be interesting there. And then most of the time I will focus on this study that was conducted with our MBA students, and then what I have taken from there to make some improvements and share some tips and recommendations with you, and a few lessons that I've learned over time working with online teaching and other technologies in my teaching. And then I've provided some useful resources for you. And then as Tamir said, we'll leave some time for questions and answers here. All right, so here are the key issues and challenges that we're facing right now in the online teaching environment. So even before COVID-19 and the current situation, many business schools were already offering more and more classes online, and there were many students already motivated to take classes online. Part of this was due to the fact that enrollments were growing in universities across the US. There were classroom shortages. We've seen those here at the Kelley School. Faculty shortages, opportunities to collaborate with other universities worldwide, convenience, flexibility, opportunities to reduce costs, right? So, but since the early days of teaching online, instructors have worried that online teaching can be not so very rich or not appropriate for all student groups. So there were some worries there. And then the research has shown that teaching effectively online goes way beyond just putting content online or allowing students to cover things at their own pace. Process is very important. Easy to navigate the materials is also very important. And this was kind of surprising to me in my early days of teaching. I realized, teaching online, I realized that students were motivated by interaction with their peers and with the instructor more so than I expected. It was more than just the materials on the learning. It was also interaction that was pretty important. And of course, COVID-19 has forced most of us now to jump into the deep end of the pool to experience online teaching. So all instructors are under tremendous pressure to try to master new technologies and transfer our face-to-face pedagogy to the online environment. And the students also have been put in a difficult situation. Many of them are questioning the value of their traditional education as it's delivered online. And they're very concerning also. Some students are demanding reimbursements and communicating that they may not be very happy, but I think it's because of the way that we were all forced to do this. I have some good news at the end about the possibilities here. So here are some of the advantages that we've known for many years about the online environment. So you can stay at home and keep working and engaging in other activities while engaging in the learning process. There's the opportunity to reduce lodging and travel costs. I'm talking about large scale delivery of online instruction. You can study wherever you have access to a computer and the internet, and of course, asynchronous approach allows students to work at their own pace, even make progress and begin in finishing their curriculum ahead of schedules. Web apps like Zoom, which we're all using now, make learning very accessible. And also, the more we use Zoom and other technologies, those skills and those experiences can transfer into the work world, which we know is very global and interconnected and globally dispersed, right? But the big disadvantage is, and there are many, one big disadvantage is that if instructors use one-way delivery of information, this quickly becomes stale and boring for students. Also, I've learned that students can very quickly feel isolated and that they crave social interaction. Not all students are equally equipped or have the discipline to stay on track. So some of them may fall behind. And of course, if an instructor is not readily available, or if the course structure takes a long time to navigate or difficult to navigate, this can be very frustrating and irritating. All right, so those are some of the challenges and opportunities. Let's try what I'm going to do is open up 4 polls for you to respond to quickly. So what we're interested in is how long you've been teaching online, how you would compare learning outcomes in the online environment versus face-to-face. How do you feel about teaching online compared to teaching face-to-face? And then what do you feel is the most important ingredient for effective online teaching? So let's open up the first poll. You figured out that this was a trick question, right? You're very good at taking multiple choice tests, as many of our students are. So that was a trick question in the sense that all of these, that's going to be the point of my presentation, is that what I've learned is that all of these are equally important. That's the vast majority there. So thank you very much, team. Let's go ahead and move on to, so here's my rationale. So why did I decide to share my thoughts with you, and how did they come about, and how can you use them? So as I've mentioned, I've been teaching in our Kelley Direct Online MBA program for about 20 years. I've also collected many teaching evaluations and gotten quite a bit of feedback from the students, but also I had some inside help. This Finding the Sweet Spot study, which I'll tell you a little bit more about, is really an inside view into what students, our online students, think about effective online teaching. So they were asked to respond via focus groups, what makes a good online course. And if you're thinking, does this stuff apply to undergraduate courses, since now we're all heavily involved in undergraduate courses, I think it does. I think that what we're seeing is that the undergraduate students, when we begin delivering more large-scale online education, undergraduate students will go through a similar experience cycle as our Kelley Direct MBA students. So I think the MBA students I've been working with are just a little bit further ahead. So in terms of our online program, it's been around since 1999. It was the first MBA program that was offered, online MBA program offered by an accredited business school. And we're very proud of the fact that we were highly ranked. We're either 1, 2, or 3, depending on which ranking you look at. So we're #1 in US News and World Report. We have over 1,000 students, and they are physically located in all 50 states and in 24 countries. We also offer a number of degrees besides a traditional MBA, several Masters of Science degrees in business analytics and finance, global supply chain, marketing, strategic management, etc. And our students have an average age of 32 years with 9 years of professional experience. And we have quite a few students who are active in the military. So you can see that they're globally dispersed. They're very busy folks, and I'm so glad that they took the time a while back to let us know what they consider to be an effective online class. So the study I'm going to refer to is called Finding the Sweet Spot, Identifying Methods and Structures that Optimize Student Learning in the Online MBA Environment. And this was a focus group study that was conducted by 2 of my former colleagues and 1 instructional support specialist. They held 3 focus groups. 2 of them were face-to-face, and 1 was via web conferencing. Surveys were used to follow up, and then the results were given, were shared with us faculty, and I took these, I was very interested and took these results very seriously, and began to make some changes to my courses, very, very timely. So what the students were responding to was what makes a good online course, and the study developed 4 major themes that are about student likes and dislikes. They were not shy to share what they liked and also what they disliked about the courses that they were already involved in. And the 4 themes involved the instructor characteristics, peer engagement and interaction, the course organization, and the use of the learning management system. I think at Georgia State, Tamir, you use a version of Brightspace. Here at Indiana, we use Canvas. Before then, we used OnCourse, and before then, we used Angel. So I'm on my 3rd learning management system. So what did the students say about the instructor characteristics? Well, they like instructors who have some expertise in the areas that they're teaching and some personal experience. They like the instructor to have some passion and interest in the topic that they're teaching, that they're able to connect the course and its relevance to what's going on in the real world, right? And this was a little bit surprising at how important it was for students to want to have the instructor form a relationship with them in the class, as well as with each individual student. And so one student captured it very well by saying that they like instructors who take the content seriously, but they don't take themselves too seriously. So also relaxed and sense of humor sort of approach. And also one of the turnoffs is, for students was courses that get stale, right? Where the instructor does not update the dates or the cases or the topics, or doesn't show competence in using technology and the learning management systems features. They're also very turned off by a course that looks to be on autopilot, or where the instructor just sets it and forgets it. So they want an instructor who is highly engaged with the class, keeps things fresh, and is willing to develop relationships with them. They're very interested in peer engagement. So they want to be challenged and motivated with difficult readings and cases and situations, but they also want real-time meaningful interaction with the instructor and with each other. They want to share what they're learning. They want to get feedback from each other and from the instructor. They want to network. They also like team deliverables. So in the beginning, for maximum flexibility, I only assigned individual work, and then I realized that students were looking for team deliverables. So I added some team projects there. So in short, students want it all. They like the flexibility and convenience of staying where they are, keeping their jobs and engaging in online education, but they want to feel like they're in the classroom face to face, right? So they really want it all, I think. And the bar keeps getting higher and higher, it seems, over time. In terms of course organization, this is very similar to the face-to-face environment, right? So I think we know that students like courses that are well organized, where the exams and other deliverables will not change unless there's a very good reason and with proper notice. They like to see the week-by-week schedule. Online students, I think, have many demands on their time, and so they like to look ahead, work ahead. They want to know what's coming. They don't want to spend a lot of time digging for the assignment directions or finding materials. They want things to be readily available and clear. They like deadlines that do not change. So in terms of course organization, I think they'd like to see it quickly in one place and from the start, and they do not want to get lost. I think there's something similar that happens with a learning management system, right? They want the syllabus to be very easy to find. They don't want to have to dig a lot. They like the modules and assignments to be logically organized. Several students mentioned that they don't understand why more instructors don't use the calendar tool in order to populate it with assignments and deadlines. I guess a lot of students really want to use the calendar tool in order to manage their time and to look ahead and to be reminded, right? They want to use some of the technology on their end. They want materials and lecture slides to be readily available and posted from the very beginning. And something that was a surprise to me, they don't like any unneeded features or buttons. If they're not being used, they don't want to see them. They want those to be hidden. And I'll show you some tricks on how I've addressed that issue. They want the instructor not to have to fumble around with the technology. They want the instructor to know what the main features are of the learning management system and to use those, right? Use the learning management system to make it easy to stay on track. So here are my recommendations and my favorite tips that have served me well. I want to share these with you. Some of these I think are pretty obvious based on what students are saying, but others I think I want to share my insights with you. So I have to work hard to communicate my interest in the topic. Of course, international business, the global business environment, international competitive strategies, cultural differences. It's not difficult, but I have to emphasize that. I can't just take it for granted. I also, at the beginning of every course, record a short video about myself, my roles, my background, my education, and I post that in a place that's easy to find on our learning management system. I even provide a video that introduces the class and even some of the frameworks. I'll give you some examples of that. I create a sense of community with a class, so I collect bio sheet information and I share it with them. I try to get them to know each other and to know me a little bit better even before the class begins. There is such a thing as a teaching presence. There is a teaching presence, and it might be more important online than it is in the face-to-face environment. So some instructors bring their teaching presence with clear organization. Some are very responsive to emails and requests. Some bring music, for example. You saw Tamir introducing some music before we began this session. You can do this before your Zoom sessions. I have a colleague that's excellent in starting his classes with a brain teaser. It gets the students really interested in what he's going to cover, and he shares a little bit of his personality. Sports, travel pictures, whatever you can do to get the students to understand your presence or who you are as a person, I think will go a long way. Incorporate current events and news within the course. Also, I think online students want more flexibility because I think their time is so spread out in so many different directions. So some flexibility, I think, would really help, more so than in the face-to-face environment, because there isn't that communication that happens twice a week. Also, taking time to gain some competence in the learning management system features and what technologies might be available. There is a cost to that. It takes time, but I think that's worth doing in the online environment. Now, what I'd like to share with you is a quick tip on how to create a sense of community in the class. This has served me very well. So I always assign a bio sheet in my classes. So the students put their contact information there, what they studied for undergraduate, what their major is, and what they hope to get out of the class, where they work, what's their position. But also in the bio sheet, I asked them for some convenient times for us to have alternate Zoom sessions. If the Zoom sessions aren't planned by the program, then if I have to create them on my own, I like to get their feedback instead of deciding what's most convenient for me. So then once I collect that information, which I collect by day one of the class, right? I push the students ahead of time to complete the bio sheet ahead of schedule. So then on day one, I take all this information and create a PowerPoint file or a PDF document that has the student pictures with their position and their physical location. I also create a map that shows visually where everyone from the class is actually located. So this is one of my previous classes here. You can see the little numbers that show which states and in which countries they are located physically while taking my course. Here are a couple of mind maps. One has the results of their selections, the most convenient times for them to have Zoom sessions. So this way, I'm not dictating to them, rather I'm using the information from them about what's most convenient in order to set the Zoom times. I adjust my schedule somewhat to their needs and their availability, and this reduces the pushback about what times we're going to hold class, the live portion of the class. And then I also collect with them the topics they're most interested in. I can't assume that what I have planned is going to be what is interesting to them for Zoom sessions. I now have a good idea after many years. So this helps the participants get to know each other and understand their physical locations and other constraints that might be going on. In terms of peer engagement, this was very important. I take time to learn their backgrounds. Not that I have to know everyone perfectly, but know their backgrounds, their companies, their training, a little bit about their background and personality. I also, it's not difficult to assign a team deliverable, team projects. And of course, I use Zoom intensively for our live real-time communication. I do, though, send preparation questions in advance. I don't like to wing it or just have a session that doesn't have, things need to be carefully planned so that we all know what to expect. I do have guest speakers, but I always make sure that there is time at the end for Q&A, at least 30 minutes of Q&A in a 90-minute session. I encourage the students constantly to share their experience and their perspective with their peers and with me, and try to work as much as possible to provide the face-to-face, as much of a face-to-face experience, given that we are physically distanced, right? And so try to use technology to bridge that space. Now, one tool that's very useful in Zoom to create engagement is to think carefully about what polls to bring in a live class, right? So I'm going to show you 3 types of polls. So the first thing I do is try to select an interesting case or situation. For me, it has to have a good learning situation or something difficult to address. So one type of poll would be, if you had to work with someone from a different culture, what would you focus on in order to understand them? Would you focus on their individual behavior, their corporate culture, their national culture pattern, for example, the dimensions of their national culture, or something else, religion, history, what would that be? It turns out that students have different ways to approach this, not necessarily by going to a source like GlobeSmart, but rather some students just like to observe and react, right, rather than prepare. So getting them to answer the poll and then discuss the poll choice by choice is very valuable for them. Siemens, I have some really good cases where there might be 4 critical decisions, and I find that students are divided in what's the solution to the case. So this is a case about what to do with the India operations of Siemens and leave them alone, take some of their responsibilities away, close them down, or invest in Bangalore, in India, and give them more responsibility. Sometimes I like to take the vote and then work with the class to develop the 4th choice, for example, which would be to invest, or allow the class to come up to their own consensus on what's the best solution. So that's all happening in a 90-minute session. And then other types of favorite polls would be when there's an expat assignment. For example, this is a case about who to assign to head the operation in Lima, Peru. So there are 3 US candidates, 2 men and 1 woman. There's a Mexican national, and then there's a local Peruvian. So to get the students to choose the best candidate based on costs and a number of criteria, and then get them to explain their rationale is very useful. So I always give them the questions in advance to prepare so that they're not under pressure to do things, but rather prepare and just share what they've learned. I also launched this during the Zoom session, and I manage the participation, right? I push students to justify their opinion or their selection. I don't just allow everybody to interact and type, rather I go choice by choice, and I have students debate with each other. I stimulate sharing, debate. We can get pretty close to what it's like in the face-to-face environment. And then at the end, I always try to summarize what I have learned or what seems to be the consensus among the group so that they feel like there's an actual learning process going on in that 90-minute session. There's one benefit to doing this well in the online environment that is better than the face-to-face classroom. Students have told me that in the online environment, they feel like they can be more honest, particularly when there is a divisive issue, because they don't have their peers face-to-face or judging what they might be saying. I find that students are much more, they feel like they can be more honest, and particularly international students, if they're typing their answers, they're not as conscious of their English competence, for example, their language competence. So that's one of the benefits of online there. I think there are several others. Course organization, this is pretty straightforward, right? Finalizing the syllabus and course materials before the start of class. I finish the syllabus and post my materials at least 2 weeks before the class starts. All I have to do is just adjust my deadline so I'm not running close to the time when they have access to I want them to see all of my materials completed as soon as they are allowed in the learning management system. I also make sure I put a week-by-week schedule with all of the due dates. I don't change these unless there's a very good reason. I can justify it and then give them sufficient notice. Try to find relevant and interesting materials, change the dates on cases. It's a turnoff when students are covering topics in a case that happened before they were born or before the internet came online. Undergraduate students are very, very picky about the freshness of their materials. Industries, for example, can excite them or turn them off, depending on our choices. Opportunities to work ahead to avoid conflicts. I'm constantly pushing the students to work ahead. Use the weekend, use holidays to work ahead in order to reduce the time pressures. And then I also like to provide a repeating structure. I like assignments to be due on the same day at the same time, week by week, and then similar types of assignments and questions and directions, again, so that they don't get lost very easily. In terms of the learning management system, I really do work hard to post materials 2 weeks in advance. And then I'm pushing the students to complete the bio sheet, look ahead, troubleshoot any areas, work ahead. The syllabus has to be at the top, very easy to find. I do eliminate any buttons or features that are not needed. I'll show you how to do that or how I came about that trick. I try to create an inviting homepage that not only explains how to contact me, but also how to navigate the course right in the beginning, as soon as they come into the class. Logical module structure and assignments that are easy to find. And then I do use the calendar tool. It turns out that I post my due dates in several different places. I use redundancy. The calendar tool, I use the syllabus, put the due dates there, and also in the learning management system in the modules. So I don't want them to get lost. I do provide my lecture notes where they can find them easily. And I do work hard to try to master the LMS features. And of course, test, right? Test all the links and make sure the pages are connected in the proper way and that the materials are available where they are supposed to be. Now, I kind of feel silly showing you what I used to do in terms of the LMS buttons that are available to them. If you look at the left bar, when a new course is created on Canvas, usually there are about 34 buttons. These are all menus or buttons in Canvas that are available to the students. In the beginning, I would just put my materials where I thought they belonged, and I didn't pay too much attention to what the students were seeing on their end. So at some point, our program encouraged us to eliminate any unneeded buttons. I didn't see really the value of that until it was explained to me by one of our tech support people what the students see. And so what I did with his help was I identified all of the buttons that were not needed. And I was shocked at how many were not needed. So when you see here the final result, when my students begin my course in a week, there are only 12 buttons, really 11 buttons that they're going to need in the class. Everything else is clutter, it's eliminated. The final button is for me, which is the settings. So this really reduces the confusion. All right. Creating an inviting home page. So when the students click on the course, and this is a screenshot from my actual course that's coming up next week, they can see that the dates are updated, a little description of the course, how to contact me, what to do in order to have a good, smooth start, and then getting help for any technological issues that might come up. And you see that the syllabus points them to these pages. These are hyperlinked pages. Here they can download a hard copy or a soft copy, an electronic copy of the syllabus, as well as view 3 videos that I have created and posted. An overview of myself, of our course, and the framework that we're going to use. This is the module structure, and then this is what to do in terms of technology, so that the students are not overwhelmed and they do not get lost. Now, the final thing I want to share with you are some tips for web conferencing. And who doesn't know now this familiar screenshot? We're all using Zoom. Even on Sunday, my siblings and I got together with my mother, who is in Kansas City, Missouri, and if all of the Garcias are using Zoom to celebrate Mother's Day, then that means everybody is using Zoom now. So it is a great tool. Actually, I won't spend too much time on the features of Zoom. I think, again, you're all familiar with them, or whatever web conferencing tool you're using. But what I'd like to do is go over some of the techniques that I use in using Zoom. So the first thing that I do is, whenever I hold a live synchronous session, I make sure that I choreograph everything and the students know what to do. So I send the assignments in advance. I have the students do a check-in and check-out process to warm up. So the check-in is very simple. What is your name? What's your physical location? How's the weather where you are? How are you doing? And then the checkout, how did things go? How are you feeling now? Any feedback for each other or for me? So this allows the connection process to happen. I require everyone to use their video and their actual name throughout the session. And in terms of interaction, I tend to use the chat pod, particularly in classes of 30, 40, 50 students. Instead of everybody using microphone, the chat pod works very well. I create directions and I offer directions as we're talking. I also take the temperature of the class. I stop, see if anybody has questions. I ask them to give me feedback. Again, it turns out to be very interactive. And then I give them difficult cases, polls, and those kinds of things. And I also hold students accountable. So I'm going to show you a quick technique that I use to hold students accountable. So I'm guiding the discussion with discussion questions. You see here on the left, they're typing in the chat pod. It turns out that just like Zoom produces a video at the end, it also produces a copy of the transcript, everything that was typed in the chat pod. So this comes as a text file at the end of a Zoom session. So I copy and paste that text file into an Excel spreadsheet. This way I can sort it by student, and then I can look at how many times they participated and what they actually typed. And then I also convert this file to a PDF or Word document and post it in Canvas for them to have. So this way they understand their grade, they understand exactly what they typed and how they participated and how that compares with their peers. So no pushback on grading and what they're supposed to do. So in terms of summary, what I've learned is that teaching online is not less work, actually. It's at the beginning, it can be more work. I think over time, it can be just about the same amount of work as face-to-face. I find that it's important to plan everything. I think you see that in my approach now. There is a real cost to master technology. So I'm on my third web conferencing tool since I started teaching online, and in my third learning management system. So that takes time. It's wise to take a gradual approach. Don't try to make your class perfect from the beginning, and also work with the students so that they can adjust. The students are better than faculty, I think, at the technologies, but still some need a little bit of help. And also, I think that you can develop some strengths. I've developed some strengths, and there are things that I like about online teaching more so than the face-to-face. I like both, but I really like to switch back and forth. In terms of more good news, the COVID-19, good or bad, has forced us all to go from resistance or curiosity to actually having to try online. So I think that that's a big change for all of us. And I think that's good news. Zoom has improved. It was already a very good tool, but vulnerabilities have been identified, and now it's a better tool in a short period of time. There's also been an explosion of technologies and help for teaching effectively online. At my university, I'm sure at your universities too, and online. So I think we are all getting help here. You can develop an alternative online presence, which may even be more comfortable than face-to-face. So I think that's very good news. I've experienced that. So we haven't wasted this crisis. I think that we should keep innovating and trying and being patient with us and with our students. But I think online education is here to stay, and I wish you all very well. I'm enjoying the ride. If I can help, let me know. So with that, here are some useful resources, and then I will turn it over to Tamir. Thanks for this opportunity, Tamir.
Thank you, Roberto. Wow, that's a lot of practical advice. I really appreciate all your best practice suggestions. Lots of questions. We have almost 150 people here join us today, and appreciate all of them. Lots of good questions, but I'll start with a quick one. I think that you may be able to answer quickly anyway. What tool do you use for creating that student location map, Roberto?
That's actually very simple. I go to, so I use a snipping tool called Snagit. So then I go to Google Maps, for example, and then I will download I'll just do a copy and paste of a map. You can find many maps online that have the different states, and then you can see the different countries. That comes from Google Maps. So it's just taking, cutting and pasting and putting that into PowerPoint and adding the arrows and numbers. Nothing fancy, it's just PowerPoint and the tools that come with Microsoft.
Another set of questions actually on collaboration. If you are having student teams work on projects, what technology platforms do you use to collaborate, engage the student teams, you among themselves as well as you with the teams?
So they're way ahead of me. They're way ahead of me. It turns out that at Indiana University, every student has a Zoom account. So if they want to have a synchronous meeting, anybody can use their Zoom account to connect with each other. Now the students also use Google Docs quite a bit. We also have some Microsoft students also who work at Microsoft, so then they have their own tools. So I really don't have to do much in terms of telling them. I just point them. And usually I just give them the assignment and they figure out how to collaborate. That hasn't been a hassle at all for me.
What about the Roberto assessment of team members when they're working on I mean, this is the same challenge we have in the traditional classroom. When we have team projects, how do you differentiate the contribution by each team member?
So what I try to do is provide flexibility for them and for myself. So I create the directions pretty clearly. Here's a tool that I use, or here's a tip that I use. I have no more than 3 persons to a team, right? So this means more work for me instead of using teams of 5 or more, but I really try to reduce the tendency toward free writing. So if I have 3 people on a team, I think that makes it more manageable. They're also very busy. The other thing that I do is I use a peer evaluation form. So I do not grade any team deliverable until I get the peer evaluation. But I think most of the time, it turns out that students share equally in the work, and it shows in the peer evaluation. So the other thing I do is in many classes, I provide the flexibility for online classes to work alone too. So I allow them to work alone if they want, or work in a team. I don't push everybody to be on a team, and I don't assign teams. So that also helps in the free writing.
Excellent. Lots of praise, Roberto. I'm happy to share from the participants. One of them says, could you give some examples of the check-in and check-out items you mentioned?
Okay, so again, so for checking in, what I would suggest is developing something that you think the students will be interested in. So the name, the physical location, how is the weather where they are? How are they feeling? You know, how was your day? So my Zoom sessions tend to be on a Wednesday or Thursday night at 7 or 8 p.m. So students are tired. They've had busy days. Sometimes weather is an easy one, right? So everybody can talk about how hot it is where they are, or how cold it is where they are. And so just something that's very, very quick. Of course, their position, if it's undergrads, I would probably ask them to share their major, their hometown, their major, perhaps their favorite sports team, something like that. Checkout can also be very simple. How did the session go for you? Did you have any issues? Is there any feedback you'd like to give to your classmates? If it was an interactive session, usually the students are very willing to say, wow, I learned a lot. Wow, 90 minutes went by very, very quickly. I really enjoyed, this was a tough case, for example. It was good to see everybody, you know, those kinds of things. And what I tell them is once you check out, then you can log out. Some students want to mingle, they want to talk to each other, or they want to talk to me, but those who have somewhere to go or they're very busy, once they check out, they can just feel free. They can feel empowered to just log off.
Excellent. Thank you, Roberto. So along those lines, looks like you have 90-minute Zoom lectures. That was one of the questions. That seems to be probably the limit in terms of attention and availability of busy participants. Do you, when it comes to, let's say, giving a final exam, how do you manage that? Do you give a certain time period for them to respond? And are your questions a mix of multiple choice and open-ended questions?
So in my online classes, it's all integrative essays. Okay. No multiple choice, right? And what I do is I make it open book, open notes. We all know about the huge problem of academic dishonesty right now, even at the grade school level. My daughter's facing that. You know, there's a lot of temptations, right? So what I do is I make sure that the students are reacting to the material. They're doing write-ups, their essays, and then I give them a 5-day window. Typically, I post the questions on Friday morning and give them until Tuesday evening to complete. it's going to be, they're not going to be working the whole 5 days, and they can stop and start, but it's going to push them to really have mastered the material that was assigned, to really craft some well thought out answers, and to demonstrate what they have been learning up to that point. So
Excellent.
open book, open note, integrative, all essay. Yep.
That's the way to go. How large are your each Zoom section? How many students do you have typically?
In a Zoom, so the sections are capped at about 45 enrollment, and the Zoom sessions, I will probably have about 20 students. And then if I have a large class, then I tried to make different Zoom sessions 2 days a week. So that what I do is I try to break them up so that we have, let's say, a class of 25 at most at any point in time to manage the interaction process.
Excellent. And do you have, a practical question, do you usually have a teaching assistant, graduate assistant to help you with each section?
Nope, it's all me, Tamir. So it's all me. So here's what happens. The time that it would have taken to present face-to-face goes into grading. And there is more time grading and providing feedback to the students. So what I like the students to be able to understand very early on is that it's me giving their feedback. It's me that's doing the grading. I even show them a picture on day one of how I take their papers, lay them out on my kitchen countertop, for example. I take over our kitchen and I show them how I spread the papers out and how I grade them and how I put them into piles and things like that, because that's part of the avoiding the set it and forget it or putting the course on autopilot, right? Mm-hmm. It also makes it more palatable when they get a grade that they don't, they're not happy with. It's just me that they have to work with. They can't come and say, well, the teaching assistant screwed up or they weren't fair. It's like, we have a Zoom session and I'll give them my rationale and then I push them to work a little bit harder next time. And so very little pushback that way. So it takes extra time, but I think that students can sense when it's not the instructor working with them or working 100% with them. But let me just say that, Tamir, teaching, as I've shared with you, is very idiosyncratic. As Jacobus mentioned in his webinar, we all have an integrated system that we use, right? And so we cannot take one technique and just apply it. We have to consider the holistic teaching approach and system that we use. And so I encourage everyone to develop their own techniques, to use what works, and to discard anything that might not work. So that's my final piece of advice.
Customize and experiment.
Exactly.
Constantly develop yourself, experiment with you.
You're not obligated to use somebody else's material, in my case.
Roberto, I want to thank you so much from our hearts on behalf of many participants here as well who stayed on with us. We are close to 150. This has been amazingly helpful. Lots of good practical assistance there. And with that, I want to turn it over to our Managing Director, Hannah Tripp.
I just wanted to say thank you, Roberto, again, and thank you everybody for joining us. This was some great informative information, great for all of us to hear.